Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. How are you people? Are you all right? I hope you are all fine. Let's start today another important lecture. You see, what did we talk about in the last lecture? Yes, we were talking about language acquisition. And I told you that we would continue that lecture. So this lecture is in continuation of the previous lecture that we talked in the previous lecture number 29, where we started what is language acquisition, and we talked about different stages of language acquisition. If you remember, we talked about different stages, you see, and we saw that it's a wonderful experience for the parents once they see their children acquiring language once a mother in fact sees the child, right, I mean, using different sounds, the consonant sound, the vowel sound, the child smile, the child cries, you see. So it's a great experience for the parents, a great experience for the siblings, and at times what we do that we help children out, you see, and the children, of course, they generally imitate. And I gave you different, of course, views that lots of research is required, right? And if you remember, we talked about behaviorist approach, and we talked about innate approach, and we saw that behavioral approach said that language is learned through activities, language is learned through drills. The more drills you give to the students, the more they would learn. And the innate approach, that language is a faculty, of course, that language is innate in the mind, the language is developed with the development of the body. And that shows, of course, when a child starts acquiring language, and this is, of course, this point is that this process of acquisition is very fast, right? This is what we have seen, and also we saw several stages, of course, of this language acquisition. The pre-language stage, 3 to 10 months, and then one word stage, of course, or a holophrastic stage, to 12 to 18 months, and then we saw the 2 word stage, that is 18 to 20 months, and we saw telegraphic speech, that is 2 to 3 years old. So dear students, that was in fact, of course, the previous lecture that we had. Let's start today's lecture, and this is what in continuation of the lecture that we had. So here, if you come on, that is second language acquisition. Today we'll be talking about second language acquisition or second language learning. So why should we master the second language? This is important, that this has been a time of the global village. The world has become global village, and of course, and we being the teachers of English, and we being student of this course, the TEFL, teaching of English as a foreign language. So we know that, of course, one man, one language, and of course, if a person knows more than one languages, it means he is now not one person, but he is a 2 person. And if somebody knows more than, one language, of course, like we Pakistani, we are all multilinguals, and of course, language, this in fact, the language that we are teaching to the students, so that is English, and of course the language of the world. So that's why, of course, second language acquisition adds value to you. In fact, when you learn a second language, so in fact you are superior. Of course, you have an edge over others. If somebody knows only one language, so he is a one individual. But if you know more than one language, so you can act as a more than, of course, as a 2 or 3 persons, right? So that's why, of course, with the globalization, with the changing technology, with the fastest moving technology, so more languages you know, it means you are more aware, you know more culture. So as, of course, we have seen that this world WWV, when communication between people has expanded well beyond their local speech communities as never before. People have had to learn a second language so as to obtain an education or secure employment at such a time. There is, of course, simple for economic purposes, for in fact awareness, for the tourist purposes, for the tourism purposes. So of course, the more languages you learn, right, second language, and it is even, of course, experts say that every language other than your L1 that you learn is your second language. So that's what, of course, it's open to discussion, that why we need to learn second language or why we learn second language. So you can give thousands of reasons for it, that why, for example, why we learn English, for example. So language of science, language of technology, language of the advanced world, right? Language of the globe, right? So if you want to move in the world, if you want to move in the globe, so the language would definitely help you, in fact. So dear students, second language acquisition, L2 we call it, can be defined as a way in which people learn a language other than their mother tongue inside or outside of a classroom, right? Like generally if you attend a college or a school or institute, so you are inside the class, and sometimes you go to an environment where it is a second language. For example, you go to UK, you go to Canada, and of course over there English is a language, of course. So over there you just learn by talking, you learn by living in that environment. So second, this is one, right? For one thing here, of course, here second can refer to any language that is learned in addition to the, of course, mother tongue. Very important point that I want you to focus on, that the second language acquisition, we call it in fact SLA, fine, can be defined as the way in which people learn a language other than their mother tongue inside or outside of a classroom. Second, for one thing here, second can refer, this word second can refer to any language that is learned in addition to the mother tongue. I have already told you. Thus it can be referred to the learning of a third or fourth language. Also second is not used to contrast with foreign. Whenever we are learning a language, naturally as a result of living in a country where it is spoken or learning it in the classroom through instruction, it is customary to speak generically of second language acquisition. So this term is very common, that whatever language other than your mother tongue that you learn or you acquire is your second language. So you cannot say that I have the English is my second, French is my third, and no, you cannot say that, because every language that you learn other than your mother tongue, your MT, of course we call it second language, right? So here why we do so, and I have given you the process. Now there is an analysis, we call it contrastive analysis, right? Contrast is a very common term. I mean, compare and contrast we use in rhetoric. And what is rhetoric? Rhetoric is a branch of linguistics where that talks about what? The use of language. So dear students, in fact, what contrastive analysis, now what is analyze, you know what analyze, analysis is what you see when you break things into the pieces. So here contrastive analysis, where you contrast things. And how do you contrast? To identify similarities and differences between particular native languages and target languages. Researchers conducted contrastive analysis from the 1940s and 1960s. This is important, right? So what is contrastive analysis? To identify similarities and differences between particular native language and target language. Researchers like, for example, they conduct contrastive analysis from 40s to 60s. Like, for example, if you do contrastive analysis of Urdu and English, for example, which sounds are common, which sounds are uncommon, right? So you can do a contrastive analysis of, for example, what Chinese and French. See, so here in this case, when you are teaching, so you find out the differences or the word similarities between particular native language and target language. Researchers conducted contrastive analysis. This one. So the main difficulties in learning a new language are caused by interference from the first language. A very simple thing. Generally a question comes in the exam that how L1 interferes in learning L2, like how Urdu interferes in learning English. So this is a general, I mean, the question that comes in exams said that when you learn English, how your L1 interferes you. Right? So what are the difficulties? The main difficulties in learning a language, of foreign languages, right, or a new language, are caused by the interference from the first language. These difficulties can be predicted by contrastive analysis. When you compare this analysis, when you find the similarities, when you find the differences, so you can find out that how many sounds are common, how many sounds are uncommon. Teaching materials can make use of contrastive analysis to reduce the effects of mother tongue interference, right? So when this teaching material, when you know that how this L1 can interfere, the learning of L2, so you can being teachers, what you do, that your material, you can make material, you can help your students accordingly. In fact, that some sounds are hard for the Pakistani speakers to speak. Some sounds are hard for the Arabic, of course, speaking. Of course, so that's a problem, you see. And if you know these problems, you can help your learners accordingly. Error analysis, again, is important and refers to the production of incorrect forms in speech and writing by a non-native speaker of a second language due to his incomplete knowledge of the rules of the target language, right? So here is what an error, you see, and again here I need to tell you the difference between an error and a mistake. So you know that mistake is what? A slip of a tongue, right? A mistake is what? Maybe because of the carelessness. However, the error is what? That error is committed, in fact, my dear students. So students, so when a Pakistani learner of English says I not go or I will not go, because the equivalent sentence in Urdu is मैं नहीं जाऊंगा, right? So in this way, of course, once you have, this can be an error, and we analyze errors, in fact, and here I told you earlier that contrastive analysis is important. So error analysis refers to the study and analysis of the errors made by the second and foreign language learners. It developed as a branch of applied linguistics in the 1960s and achieved considerable popularity in 1970s, right? So this is what the error analysis. It may be carried out in order to identify strategies which learners use in language learning. Fine. To try to identify the causes of learners' errors, obtain information on common difficulties in language learning as an aid to teaching or in the preparation of teaching material. So this is what, my dear students, error analysis is there, right? It's the, of course, the study and analysis of the errors made by the second and foreign language learners. Again, of course, you know it, that what is the context of second language learning and what is the context of course, foreign language learning. I told you in the last semester, I'm sure you know that once you learn a language, of course, or you teach language in an environment where it is language of communication, so over there it will be a second language. When you are a teacher in Canada, of course, you're a teacher of English, you teach English there in Canada, so over there it will be a second language. Why? Because it is language of communication. Here in Pakistan, of course, our language of communication is Urdu, so here it is a foreign language. So that's why error analysis is important, and then it may be carried out in order to identify strategies which learners use in language learning, try to identify the causes of learner errors, obtain information on common difficulties in language learning as an aid to teaching or in the preparation of teaching materials. Error analysis was therefore offered as an alternative to contrastive analysis, right? See, so attempts were made to develop classifications of different types of errors on the basis of the different processes, right, that were assumed to count on for them. A basic distinction was drawn between intralingual and interlingual errors. Now it's again a very important point, that what is intralingual errors and what are interlingual errors. Now this is, you know, the word intra, within the language, right? Like, intrapersonal communication. When I talk to myself, that is intrapersonal. When communication between people, interpersonal, right? So here is intralingual, mean within a language, right? Intralingual errors. And then you have interlingual errors, mean between languages. Intralanguage mean errors within a language. For example, you see, talking about Urdu. So if you find errors in Urdu, in fact, so there are intralingual errors. However, when you compare Urdu with English, so there would be interlingual errors. Comes, for example, right? He comes from China, Beijing, right? So result from faulty or partial learning of the target language, so caused by the learner's native language transfer. See, so here means when you're talking about the intralingual, here within the language. So then interlingual errors between languages. Here is interlanguage. What is it? For example, the Spanish speakers who says in English, she name is Mary, right, is pronouncing a form which is not used by adult speakers of English, does not occur in English, L1 acquisition by children, and is not found in Spanish either. Well, students, interlanguage, in fact, when you try to, of course, when you learn a language, of course, from L1 to L2, so there is a system that exists between these two, the systems from, moving transition from L1 to L2. So evidence of this sort suggests that there is some in-between system which acquires L2, which certainly contains aspect of both L1 and L2, but which is an inherently variable system with rules of its own. This system is called interlanguage and is now considered to be the basis for all L2 production. Well, individual differences in second language acquisition, right? SLA theories acknowledge that there are some individual differences in L2 acquisition. That we have this screen that says that what are these differences in second language acquisition, especially some psychological dimensions of differences. Here we will focus on four major dimensions: language aptitude, cognitive style, personality traits, and learning strategies. Right? These are some of the differences in SLA, of course, theories. There are some individual differences in L2 acquisition, and what do we call it? Individual differences in second language acquisition, especially some psychological dimensions of differences. Here we focus on four major dimensions, that is language aptitude, you know it, cognitive styles, personality traits, and learning strategies. So here's what language aptitude, like point is, if you go back, show you here that what are the differences, individual differences in second language acquisition, right? And here these are the differences at the four levels: language aptitude, cognitive styles, personality traits, and learning strategies. First one is language aptitude. Language aptitude was known as those, of course, that people differ in extent to which they possess a natural ability for learning in L2, which is the thought to be a combination of various abilities. So what is this language aptitude, right? So again, different people have, of course, they in fact, they have a different aptitude for language acquisition. Some people are, of course, prone to acquiring, of course, or the learning language too, and they learn it quickly. And some people, in fact, they don't have that much aptitude to in fact learn a second language, and they take time. What are the factors behind this? Of course, research, in fact, is to be done. That you see, maybe the environment is the factor, or the internal environment, or the external environment, or the domestic environment. So these are some of the factors that determine that, of course, you see that some people have, of course, language aptitude, and some people do not have that much language aptitude, right? So people differ in their extent to which they possess a natural ability, of course, for learning an L2, which is thought to be a combination of various abilities. According to Correll's modern language aptitude, MLAT, the components of language aptitudes are phonemic coding ability, 1, 2, grammatical sensitivity, 3, inductive language learning ability, 4th, rote learning ability. This is what a researcher's viewpoint, that what he says, what Correll says, that the combination of language aptitude are what? Phonemic coding ability, means that you are able to code these phones, phonemic coding ability. Some people are very good in fact in coding what phones, sounds, and some people find it hard. And again, here means the L1 interferes. And then grammatical sensitivity, some people are very sensitive to grammar, and some people cannot understand the rules, and some people can do that. Inductive language learning ability, of course, is important, right? And then rote learning. Some are good at rote learning and some cannot do that. So these are the, the Carroll's viewpoint. Learners who score highly on language aptitude test typically learn rapidly and achieve higher levels of L2 proficiency than learners who obtain low scores, right? So those who score good scores, in fact, on language the test, they typically learn rapidly and achieve higher level of L2 proficiency than learners who obtain low scores. So again, it varies from learner to learner. Some learners, in fact, get very good score, right, when they take the language aptitude test, and some, of course, get poor score. Now, the next one is cognitive style. Now, again, cognition goes with mind, right? That, of course, language learning is a cognitive process, right? So what is the cognitive style? Field dependence and field independence, right? As far as cognitive style is concerned, you have two things. One is the field dependence and second is field independence. Now, field dependence is measured by asking learners, right, to look at complex patterns and identify a number of simple geometric figures that are hidden within them. So this cognitive styles, of course, we just talk about the field dependence and field independence. So as far as field dependence is concerned, my dear students, that what it is measured by asking learners to look at complex patterns and identify a number of simple geometric figures that are hidden within them, right? The purpose is to see whether they are able to speak up, they are able to break up what they see into parts and keep those parts separate from the whole, right? And the characteristics of this field dependence, of course, field dependent language learners are that they accept that L2 information exactly as it is presented to them by the teacher. They do not try to realize or think about it themselves. They are very reliant on in their L2 learning. In simple, of course, they rely on the input that they get from their instructor, of course, the teacher of that language. They tend to be seen as outgoing or interested in others, and so would be expected to develop good interpersonal communication skills in L2. So what they rely on the teachers, of course, they get maximum information, right? And this helps them in, of course, in their interpersonal communication skills. Now, field independence, the previous was field dependence, right? They depend on a field. They depend more on what? On the input that they get. Field independence learners, on the other hand, do not assume that L2 information that they are given is necessarily correct. So they are field independent, you see. So they tend to analyze it and think about it themselves to find out whether it is correct or not. So they are, of course, they are able to analyze, they analyze things. Fine, they have a strong sense of what? Strong sense of personal identity, and often seem insensitive to and distant from other persons. Simple mean that they might therefore be expected to be less interested in developing communication skills in the L2. So field independence, in fact, what my dear students, that what they do, that these students, in fact, they are independent of the information that they get. They try to analyze things, they try to view things, and field independence is typical of a learner who think about the input that they get. They would develop a broader and deeper understanding of the structure of the language than those who take all L2 input at face value. Therefore, they have a better performance on structure test, because these people are the field independence learners of a language. They are analyzers. They in fact analyze things. They think over things, and they, in fact, once they do it, they become better in analyzing this. Of course, the knowing this structure of language, as compared with the field dependent. So, in simple words, my dear student, if you go back, see in field dependence, they depend on the input that they get from their instructor in L2. So here these people are, in fact, they get input, but they do not take it as, in the literal sense, right? what they do, they think over it, they analyze it, they perform an analysis of it, you see, and finally they are able to find out the structure of it. Now the third one is personality traits. Right, again there are two personality traits, introverts and extroverts. These two terms are used in personality, right? Some are introvert people and some are extrovert people. Now who are introvert and who are extrovert? Very simple term. Introvert are those people that who are not social, right? They want to live alone. They are not more social. Introvert people, they prefer working alone. They don't interact more. Right. However, the extrovert people, they want company, they live in company, they become important part of a company. The relationship between language proficiency and, of course, extroversion seems to be true when assessing proficiency, and extroversion seems to be true when assessing proficiency at using the language, but not when assessing knowledge of the language. So again, see, the one is that performance of the language, and second is what? The competence of the language. So if you are introvert or you are extrovert, so the relation between language proficiency and extroversion seems to be true. If you are proficient and if you are extrovert, right? True when assessing proficiency, and extroversion seems to be true when assessing proficiency at using the language, but not when assessing knowledge of the language. Yes, again it's important. If you are extrovert and if you are proficient, if you are extrovert and you are proficient, well, students, so talking about the proficiency of a language, that this slide says that, well, if you are proficient and if you are extrovert, right? So it is not, these things do not determine that you are, in fact, you are what? You have knowledge of the language. Yes, you have competence of language because you are proficient and you are extrovert, you are more social, right? You use the language, so you are proficient. So your knowledge of language cannot be tested, cannot be done through this way. So learning strategies is important. That language aptitude, cognitive styles, and personality traits are the general factors that affect the rate and level of L2 achievement. These are the general factors we talked about. General factors include what? Language aptitude. If you have aptitude for language 2, right? And then your cognitive styles, and again your personality traits, that you are extrovert or you are introvert, right? These are the general factors that of course affect the rate of level of L2 achievement. Learning strategies are the particular approaches or techniques that learner use to try to learn an L2, right? Now 3 major types of learning strategies have been identified, right? So there are some strategies, we call them learning strategies. These are the particular approaches or techniques that teachers use to try to learn an L2. Now 3 major types of learning strategies have been identified. First, cognitive strategies, meta-cognitive strategies, and social strategies. 3 strategies are there. First one, cognitive, second, metacognitive, and third one, social strategies, right? Now what is metacognitive, right, and cognitive and social? Now cognitive strategies, right? You know the word cognition, that goes with your mind, right? Refer to the steps or operations used in problem solving that need direct analysis, right? Analysis, transformation, or synthesis of learning material. This is, we call it cognitive strategies, right? Which strategy? Cognitive strategy, that refers to the steps or operations used in problem solving that need direct analysis, right? Transformation or synthesis of learning material. Next one is meta-cognitive strategies, make use of knowledge about cognitive processes and constitute attempts to regulate learning, of course, language learning, by means of planning, monitoring, and evaluating. So here what we call it metacognitive is there, that more monitoring is there, more evaluation is there, in fact, right? So these things, what a strategy that is metacognitive. Previous that was cognitive, goes with the mind, but here meta, of course, knowledge about cognitive processes and constitute attempts to regulate language learning. Social or effective strategies concern the ways in which learners choose to interact with other learners and native speakers, right? Third one is what we call social strategies, right? Social or affective strategies. So my dear students, cognitive strategies, metacognitive strategies, and social mean environment concern the ways in which learners choose to interact with each other, with other learners and native speakers. So good language learners are also very active, in fact, show awareness of the learning process and their own learning styles, and above all are flexible and appropriate in their use of learning strategies that involve formal practice, rehearsing a new word, contribute to the development of linguistic competence, while strategies involving functional practice, right? I mean, seeking out native speakers to talk to, and the development of communicative skills. The study of learning strategies is of potential value to language teachers. If strategies that are crucial for learning can be identified, it may prove possible to train students to use them, right? And then, of course, so this is what, my dear students, you see that good language learners are very active, they're very dynamic, right? And they put efforts, in fact, right? And they keep on rehearsing, they keep on practicing that language, and the good language learners find opportunities to brush up their skills. They find opportunities, of course, and to refine their skills, and they communicate, in fact, because language learning, right, needs your practice. The more you practice, the better you will be. So of course, you being the teachers of this course, student of the TEFL, of course, I mean, first of all, we have to, being teachers, we have to improve our skills. So what we can do, we have to communicate, we have to interact, we need to be proficient, right, and we need to be social in that, and we need to realize that, of course, if you have to teach this language, you need to be good at this language. And how can you be that? By being a good language learner. And how you can be a good language learner? If you talk more, if you speak more, in fact, and if you create opportunities for this one, so things would go in your favor. And whatever strategy you come to know for improving language, whatever strategy you come to know for teaching language, you incorporate that strategy, you use that strategy, and see its in fact expect results. If the strategies work, then you can go on with that. So then, of course, instruction and language to acquisition, my dear students. One of the goals of the second language acquisition to improve language teaching. Here we will consider three branches of what? Three branches of the research. The first concerns whether teaching learners grammar has an influence on their interlanguage development. Do learners learn the structures they are taught? It's a question. The second draws on the research into individual learner differences. Do learners learn better if the kind of instruction they receive matches their preferred ways of learning? For example, if you give them instructions in L1, right? So because mostly learners, if you ask them, they would prefer having instructions in L1. The third branch looks at the beginning of course, training of strategies used by good language teachers, good language learners, right? These are the three things, in fact, what? Instruction and L2 acquisition, right? So the three branches of the research are whether teaching learners grammar has an influence on their interlanguage development. Second draws on the research into individual learner differences. Third one, of course, looks at the training of strategies used by good language learners. So here, of course, the first one is that form-focused instructions. Well, students, so this form-focused instruction, of course, very simple. If you see the word focus on the form. So instructions which draw attention to the forms and structures of the language within the context of communicative interaction is called form-focused instruction. Right? So this is what means that what we do, that you draw attention to the forms and structures of the language within a context of communicative interaction. So this grammar translation method and the audio-lingual method, of course, we had a discussion on that. This grammar translation method and the audio-lingual method both attempt to teach learners grammar, and their only difference is how this is to be fulfilled, right? More recently, in fact, however, language pedagogy has emphasized the need to, of course, provide learners with real communicative experience. Right? This communicative language teaching is based on the assumption that learners do not need to be taught grammar before they can communicate, but will acquire it naturally as part of their learning process. This is what you see, the form-focused instruction that you see. Of course, the purpose is communication, right? The learner, of course, of a second language, of course, they should be able to communicate in that language. And you see that we had a discussion, of course, that, well, the grammar translation method focuses on grammar, right? Audiolingual method also focuses on grammar in a different way, but this communicative language teaching, in fact, focuses on communication first, and then grammar people acquire naturally as part of their learning process. Now, these were the word form-focused instruction. Now here is learner instruction matching. Here the learner instruction matching involves an attempt to ensure that the teaching style is suited to the learner. Again, it is very important that, of course, if the teaching style suits the learner, so teaching would be appropriate. And if it does not suit the learner, so it will be difficult for the teacher, and naturally it will be difficult for the learner. It is based on the assumption that learners have different learning styles and that they will learn most effectively if the instruction matches their particular learning styles. Right? Again, I mean, this is some people, they learn, of course, I mean, the best through reading. So if the teaching, in fact, incorporates reading, so definitely, because this learning style is that the learners, in fact, learn the best through reading, or the learners learn best through interaction. So again, that if the instructions, the learner instructions, they match, fine. So it would be the best, right? And if it doesn't, things would be difficult. Educational research which has investigated an effect, of course, of such instruction is sometimes referred to as aptitude treatment interaction. We call it ATI, right? So that is what that your in fact a learner instruction matching, that when you teach language, and if your teaching in fact matches with the learner's requirement, so that would be good teaching. In fact, that would be useful for the learner, because they are being trained, they are being taught in the styles that they prefer, and we call it ATI. Now, strategy training, my dear students, what is it? Most of the research on strategy training, I mean, again, the word strategy training means that is, of course, long-term training. You see, for language teaching, that research on strategy training or learner training has concentrated on vocabulary learning, training students to use strategies that concern different ways of making associations with target words, right, has generally proved successful, right? This is very important, my dear student, that of course most of the research on strategy training or learning training, you see, has concentrated on vocabulary learning, right? Teaching students to use strategies that concern different ways of making associations with target words has generally proved successful, right? So this is important point. The keyword method requires learners to form two kinds of association. First, learner associate the target word with the word which is the same as or similar to an L1 word. The Japanese word ayo, meaning morning, right, might be associated with aho or a state in the United States. Second, the L1 word is linked to a mental image that incorporates the meaning of the target word. The learner thinks of a very cold morning in winter, right? In Ohio, it has been shown that these associations can help to memorize the target word. So of course, association, mnemonics, in fact, right? So when you associate words, and for some time generally it is, if you must have seen that, of course, in the grammar translation method, of course, that of course, I mean, you teach that language, but you give the meaning in the L1. So here what means that you associate words, maybe you use different ways to in fact help students improve their vocabulary in fact. The idea of strategy training is attractive because it provides a way helping learners to become autonomous, that is, of enabling them to take responsibility for their own learning. So this is a very important point, that you see, once you make learners independent, once you develop autonomy of the learners, so things can be useful in fact. So dear students, what we did in this lecture, a very important lecture that we had, that why we master second language, and we discussed that second language learning. When you know a second language, when you are able to speak a second language, so it means you are of course you have added value to yourself, right? If you know one language, it means you are a single person, and if you know more than one languages, if you know 4 languages, now you are 4 persons. So that's why of course means your scope increases if you know more than one language. And of course, being teachers, of course we need to encourage our students in fact that they should learn languages. And again, this could be a way to motivate the students in fact, because when they come for learning a foreign language, and they come for learning a second language, you need to motivate them that how this language would help them in their future. So that is why we learn second language, because when we learn second language, we add value to ourselves. We can work the better, and of course second language in fact opens horizons for you, job opportunities, right? You can get better opportunities, right? So that's why of course second language is important. So again, why we are in fact learning English, for example, and why we are preparing ourselves to teach this language, being the student of the TOEFL, because the target languages, the language that we are going to teach, or that language that we are of course trying to improve, so that we could teach this language as an international language. So this language has huge scope. Of course, you'll be teaching this language, right? Of course, I mean in the Middle East, and of course all over the world there is a need for this language, because it is the language of the globe, right? And of course language of the science, language of technology, language of media, language of in fact the medicines, right? Language of journalism, right? Of course international journalism, media is a message, right? So that's why of course that you see, when you know a second language, you are able to speak a second language, so your chances of growth, right, prosperity of course definitely increase, right? So and then I told you that of course that the more languages you know, you become multilingual, and if you are multilingual, you are multicultural. Of course, you are multicultural, you have more awareness. So you are a pragmatic mind in fact, because definitely the culture is hidden in a language. When you know a language, you come to know about different cultures. So the more cultures you know about, right, the more aware you would be in fact, right? So therefore second language, of course we recommend second language learning is a great value. Second language acquisition, of course, as a lay we call it, can be defined as the way in which people learn a language other than their mother tongue inside or outside of a classroom. This is very important. You learn language L1 in fact, and you see I told you that of course every language that you learn other than your L1 is your second language. I mean there is no S3, or there is no, of course there is no L3, there is no L4, right? So I mean maybe you know more than one languages, of course you know French, you know German, but all these languages are L2 for you. They are not L3 or L4, right? So you have to keep this in mind, that you see every language that you learn other than your mother tongue, other than your language 1, is your second language, right? So this term second is, I mean, you need to know, it's really important. Now of course that how to learn this second language, of course you have to see language aptitude, really important. And of course once you, I mean to check the language aptitude, we can conduct different the tests to see whether the learner has aptitude for it or not. And also this style, cognitive styles, of course, and then personality traits, either he is introvert or extrovert. Generally it is believed that if you are extrovert, you are a social person, you can be proficient in that language, you can be proficient, right? However, I mean, you may not have that, you may have more knowledge of the language, but you will be proficient because what you are extrovert person. And then of course our learning strategies, right, are the particular approaches or techniques that learner use to try to learn in L2. Three major types of learning strategies have been identified: cognitive strategies, right, metacognitive, and social, in fact, what strategies, right? Cognitive strategies definitely go with the mind, in fact, that you see how you process information, how you in fact perceive things, and how you try to, of course, I mean, speak the language. And of course metacognitives, and then you have what, in fact, social strategies. So dear student, this one is of course that the second language learning is a great asset, is a great I mean the value for your personality. And then of course, mind you, that the people who know more than one languages, they have edge over those who know only one languages. So how to make the second language, in fact, second language learning or second language successful? Yes, again, it's important. Your personality can play an important role in this way, right? What your personality can do, that if you are extrovert, if you want to be proficient, so this trait of personality would definitely help you, in fact, and you can learn the language well. And of course, naturally, of course, if you are proficient in the beginning, so after some time you will be accurate as well, right? So focus on the proficiency, focus on the fluency, and later accuracy comes later on. And second language that you learn, of course, or you teach your students, right? So keep in mind that how that second language is being taught, and what else can be done to improve it. So again, if you are a teacher, of course, if you are teaching this language, see what else can be done. Or if you feel some are very successful teachers of language too, see them, what do they do, in fact, what are their strategies, right? And see and try to incorporate those strategies in the teaching of foreign language. So the point is, the very important point is that your role as a teacher, right? How you motivate learners. In fact, if I go back to the first lecture, where we discussed that, of course, the role of a teacher is very important. Role of a teacher in language teaching is particularly important, because he keeps on motivating the students, and he keeps on thinking different ways, right, to help learners, in fact, to learn the language. And of course, it is not an easy job, because it takes time, you see. And if you are committed, if you put efforts, right, and if you feel that it is a great value addition, if you feel that there is a huge scope for it, right, and if you feel that, of course, once you know this language and you can read literature of the world, and fortunately, of course, if you are teaching this language, and you are teaching language of the globe, so it means if your learner, if they learn this language, they will be able to read literature of the world, because of course the world literature is also available in the international language. So again, you can use it as a good point, that you are learning this language and it's a language of the globe, right? And of course you are teacher of the language because you are teaching this language of the globe. So again, it would pay both the teacher, and of course it would pay both the teacher and the learner, provided they realize its importance, provided they realize its value in the market, right? And it is not only, of course, you are doing masters and you have to teach this language. Of course, this teaching of this language would help you in different organizations. You can use this skill, of course, of the teaching of English in different organizations. Of course, different companies need people, good people, in fact. So you can find opportunities there to be a trainer in communication skills. So there are avenues, provided you are a good TEFL instructor, provided you in fact focus on strategy training, provided you focus on good language teaching. These are some of the ways that you must work on. That's a very important lecture. If I show you it again, that what we did in this lecture quickly. So this lecture was, in fact, my dear student, these two lectures that we have lecture 29, and the 30, lecture 29, we talked about language 1 instruction, right? And we discussed that of course L1 acquisition is very important, and we saw different phases of L1 acquisition. We talk about 3 to 10 month pre-language phase, and of course then 10 to 18 months, right? And then 1 month, 1 word stage, and 2 word stage, of course. And then we move on to L2 language learning, and we saw that L2 language learning is a value addition. And being teachers, of course, why we need L1 acquisition? Because L1 acquisition definitely helps you, of course, in your L2 teaching, right? So L1 acquisition, we talk about L1, what is L1, and how children acquire L1, and then those definitely, of course, the phase help us in teaching of L2. Like when you teach language 2, what do? That you focus on essential skills of language, and you teach listening skill, you teach reading skill, you teach writing skill. So why do you teach these skills? Because you have seen that the language 1 is acquired through these ways. We have acquired language 1 by listening, we have acquired language 1 by reading, we have acquired language 1 by speaking, we have acquired language 1 by writing as well. So the way we have acquired that language, now we have to put the same way in our language 2 acquisition, so language 2 learning as well, right? So in order to help your students, in fact, speak this language well, in order to help your students read this language well, in order to help your students write this language well, so these are you focus on these skills of language, right? So dear students, this language 2 learning and of course language 2 teaching, of course, both require continuous efforts. The teachers of this language, they must work, right, to read about different strategies and incorporate those strategies in the teaching process. Learners, of course, learners' autonomy is also important, right? We discussed in the last lecture that the CAL is also important. Computer-aided language learning, in fact, gives learners autonomy, right? And again, autonomy of the learner, of course, is really important for language 2 learning, and realizing this fact that every language that we learn other than the first language is what we call it L2 learning. And how can we do that? You can, of course, you can join institutes, right? You can live in an environment, right? If you want to learn it, of course, definitely the context is important, right? The classroom teaching is there, but of course after the classroom, if you refer your learners to computer, if you refer to different websites, so learning would be faster, learning would be more useful, in fact. So this is what I have. If you have any question, you can ask. Okay, L1 acquisition and L2 learning. All right, I told you this thing that, well, some experts, they feel that L1 we always acquire and L2 we learn. And again, some researchers, they use this term for they say, for L1 acquisition, like we have seen in this slide that we have used L1 acquisition, and we use the same verb acquisition for L2, right? So these terms can be used interchangeably, in fact. Any other question that you had? How language adds value? Okay, that's a good question, my dear students. We had a discussion on it that, well, language definitely adds values to you. Language improves you. Language makes you more professional. Language, if you know a language, it means you know a bit about the culture of that, of course, those people. So knowing the culture means you are more aware, right? So again, if you know a language, right? If you know more than one languages, you are more aware of the environment. So that is really, of course, important, my dear students, when we talk of course, then we keep this in mind, that the more languages you know, the better you would be, in fact. And the more languages, of course, make you more knowledgeable, more aware of the international world. Any other question that you have? No question? All right, students. So it's a time to say goodbye. See you inshallah in the next lecture. Till then, it's Allah Hafiz.